I'll go to Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Stefanic, and everyone for appearing today. And there was an inquiry into your department, Mr Stefanic, some years ago, about 2 years ago, correct?
I believe
Senate
so.
inquiry.
Yes, Senator.
About 2 years ago?
Would be roughly that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was participating in that inquiry when I was a member of the Finance and Public Administration Committee. I was quite alarmed with some of the testimony from members of staff, especially the security staff, and in fact I've been bailed up by two people in the, and I must say pleasantly, they weren't threatening, two of your security staff in the supermarkets in Canberra, saying that they weren't happy with the outcome at all, and the culture was not revealed. I've got some articles here from the ABC, of all places, and also from the Australian, describing the Federal Department of Parliamentary Services facing allegations of a toxic culture that silences dissent and covers up problems. What's your total remuneration package, Mr Stefanic?
I don't have the exact figure off the top of my head, Senator, but it's some quantum over 400,000.
Over 500,000?
No.
Okay, so between 400 and 500.
Less than 450.
Listen, that's total, including super, everything.
Correct.
Thank you. Mr Stefanic, you created the position of Deputy Secretary of your department, correct?
Well, the role of Deputy Secretary existed when DPS was originally created. I believe in about 2013, the position at the time was made redundant by the Acting Secretary. Might have been 2012. Following my appointment in December 2015, it took some time for me to undertake a review of the department and to look at what the appropriate structure would be for it. The majority of the senior executive team were fairly new to the agency, and at that point in time I felt there was little need to add a deputy role to it, given I had to get across the subject matter of the department. So following my initial review, I decided not to reinstate the position of Deputy Secretary. I did undertake another review myself, a fitness for purpose review, I think probably around 2017. And at that point, it became clear that it was necessary to reinstate the role of Deputy Secretary, mainly because my workload across a portfolio of several divisions and nearly 1,200 staff at the time was too much for me to bear. And it was important to have a deputy role that could deal with many of the both policy but also operationally related requirements that arise from day to day. So I had, on a temporary basis, reinstated the Deputy Secretary role as a trial, and following a period of time I then made the judgment that it was important for the Deputy Secretary role to be a permanent feature of the department again, which is when I advertised the role. Okay.
So did you appoint Ms Cate Saunders to that position, initially on an acting basis?
I did, Senator, and the rationale for that was out of the cohort of senior executive staff at the time, Ms Saunders was the Chief Operating Officer as an SCS Band 2 level. The Deputy Secretary role is in effect the Chief Operating Officer for the department, in addition to other responsibilities.
Sorry, which role is Chief Executive?
The Deputy Secretary is the Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you. So you'd be equivalent to the Chief Executive?
No. So typically, Chief Operating Officer will have responsibility for corporate matters, but this role is more expansive in the respect that it has responsibility for matters such as security and also finance and property matters.
Okay, thank you. What was the total remuneration for the position? Somewhere in the realm of $420,000 a year?
Total package, possibly around that amount.
There have been many rumours about the relationship between you and Ms Saunders, and I'd like to understand the process that she went through to be appointed into that position. Could I have the panel notes and the correspondence involving her appointment, her application and her then processing of her application and her appointment, please? On notice.
First of all, Senator, the panel was run based on a standard merit selection process. The panel members included the Clerk of the Senate and the Chief Executive of the High Court of Australia, so I can give you every assurance that the process was independently managed. In respect of the documentation, I would have to take that on notice, Senator.
Yes, thank you. If we could have the notes from each of the panel members and the process that was followed in appointing and assessing in Ms Saunders' application and assessing it and then actually appointing her.
I'll take that on notice, Senator.
Thank you. Were you ever there are a number of articles here, 2 articles I've got, reports of a relationship between the 2 top public servants within the department. Were you ever in a romantic relationship with Ms Saunders prior to appointing her?
Senator, I think what I might address, I guess, the elephant in the room. In recent weeks, I've had to endure inquiries and media reports reflecting adversely on my integrity, reports based on malicious and gossip-laden information. I've endured repeated violation of my personal privacy based on an alleged public interest. I'll readily address questions about my integrity as is relevant to public confidence in my role as a parliamentary service leader. However, respectfully, I'm not prepared to subject further my family members to further personal privacy intrusions.
Well, between your salary and Ms Saunders' salary, it's almost $1 million a year. I think the public has a right to know about what's happening in that relationship. $1 million is not a little amount of money.
I would contend, Senator, it's somewhat short of $1 million. And
$870,000 plus to...
I can assure you, Senator, as I have unsuccessfully tried to communicate to members of the media, that I have taken all reasonable steps to manage and declare any conflicts of interest as has been appropriate. I believe integrity and the principles of integrity followed DPS are critical of public confidence.
I agree.
I understand more than most that the intense scrutiny by parliamentarians and the media that my department experiences and the necessity for accountability and integrity. And to my mind, the perceptions of conflict are just as important as actual conflict. So I want to give you assurance, Senator, that I have acted appropriately at all times.
Mr Stefanic, with respect, you haven't actually answered the question. Were you in a romantic relationship with Ms Saunders while you were her boss?
Senator, as I have mentioned, I'm not prepared. If I open the discussion of my privacy, it becomes a further matter for speculation and discussion. I've endured that for quite some years. This is actually not new. As I've said, my privacy has already been considerably violated in this process, and I really am not prepared to entertain any questions that speak to my personal privacy. As I said, Senator, I am willing to answer any questions in relation to my integrity, and to that end I will do so.
You still haven't answered the question. I understand your perspective that it raises more questions, but if you answer that question, yes or no, it ends it right there. So what's the answer? If you are being inconvenienced, hurt by continuing questioning, just put an end to it. Taxpayers have a right to know what's going on in the Department of Parliamentary Services.
To that end, I'll give you a simple answer, Senator, and that is no.
Okay, thank you. Did you ever discuss the relationship or give notice of it in the past to any official?
Senator, as I said previously, the perceptions of a conflict of interest are almost as important as any actual conflict of interest for people such as myself.
I agree.
Where any friendship would seem to be, would have the perception of being less than where the perception of it would be less than impartial, I make the appropriate declarations and, as necessary, with the legislation.
How much was the former Deputy Secretary, Ms Saunders' exit package on her retirement from the DPS? I understand it's called an incentive to retire.
Perhaps I might refer to Ms
Senator Jarla Hinchcliffe, Deputy Secretary, Department of Parliamentary Services. An incentive to retire was paid to Ms Saunders through a delegation that was given to the CEO of Services Australia. Services Australia were the entity that negotiated that with her, but DPS were her employer, and so we made then the payment.
Excuse me, could you explain why the Department of Services was...
Services Australia, Ms Saunders was seconded to Services Australia at that time, and Services Australia took part in the discussions with Ms Saunders.
Even though she was employed by DPS?
And she was an employee of DPS at the time. There was a delegation from the Secretary of DPS to the CEO of Services Australia to be able to make employment decisions in relation to Ms Saunders while she was at Services Australia, and a payment was made to Ms Saunders in relation to severance and payment in lieu, which amounted to $315,125.85.
So
that's a net figure.
Thank you. So let me just check my understanding. I may be wrong here. Ms Saunders left DPS to go to Services Australia.
Ms Saunders went on secondment from DPS to Services Australia.
So she never left DPS until she was... till she got the incentive to retire.
So she finished at DPS on the 1st of October 2023, but she went on secondment on the 17th of April 2023.
And
Senators, we're due for a morning tea break, and I think there are many of us that need one, so we'll suspend for 15 minutes and return at 11:15. Thank you. We'll now resume, and Senator Roberts, you still have the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Maybe just a clarifying question, Mr Stefanic. I appreciate that the previous session was difficult, may have been difficult. I appreciate your answer. It may be helpful, given your answer, if you could just clarify once and for all. Have you ever been in a romantic relationship with Ms Saunders before or after her appointment?
Senator, I answered your question unequivocally just before the break.
That was... you didn't answer my question just then. That was in regard to having a romantic relationship with the person while you were their boss? Before, now I'm asking before or after?
Senator, I answered your earlier question in relation to any relationship when Ms Saunders worked to me. I've made some pretty clear statements about my personal privacy. Those questions are go exactly to that, and on the basis of that, I think I have answered your question, as is relevant to my role as a secretary of this department and as a parliamentary service leader.
With respect, Mr Stefanic, you didn't answer in regard to the period before you were Ms Saunders' boss and after you were Ms Saunders' boss. That's what I'm specifically asking now.
Well, Senator, it's not relevant. It's simply not relevant.
Perceived conflicts of interest, as you've said yourself, is entirely relevant.
I've made any relevant conflicts of interest declarations as and when appropriate, as I have during my entire career.
Well, I note that you're not answering the question, but I'll move on. Who was responsible for approving the package? This is either to Ms Hinchcliffe or Mr Stefanic. Was Mr Stefanic in any way involved in approving the incitement? Was it the retirement package for Ms Saunders?
Thank you, Senator. No, there was an instrument of delegation that was signed by Mr Stefanic and sent to the CEO of Services Australia, which allowed Services Australia to negotiate the package with Ms Saunders. That was done with Ms Saunders by Services Australia and their questions for Services Australia. As I said, on the 1st of October 2023, Ms Saunders ceased her employment with DPS.
And Mr Stefanic was not involved in the determination of the package?
So Mr Stefanic was not involved with the determination of the package. Mr Stefanic provided a delegation to the CEO of Services Australia to be able to make employment decisions in relation to Ms Saunders, and those decisions were made by Services Australia, and then the termination payment was made by DPS.